White House says ICE traffic stops will continue after deadly shootings, after earlier pause reports. The federal record is anchored by Reuters, NPR News, The Guardian, and The Hill, all pointing to a reversal after two immigrants were fatally shot by agents in early July. The practical question is how immigration officers use vehicle encounters while investigations, training rules, and local police coordination remain under scrutiny. Families, drivers, field supervisors, and courts need a written rule, not just public comments. Watch for a dated DHS memo, a White House clarification, court filing, or local guidance that says whether any restrictions remain. If those records do not appear, the current source trail means the pause did not become binding policy. Investigators still have to document each shooting, and local governments need notice if federal enforcement patterns change on roads their officers patrol. Reuters supplies the policy reversal, NPR News supplies the death context, The Guardian supplies the DHS halt framing, and The Hill supplies the political response. The next checkpoint is official paperwork that changes what agents may do tomorrow. That final paper trail should also state who reviews the shootings, whether body camera or incident reports will be released, and whether any field office receives different instructions. Those details decide if this becomes oversight or routine enforcement. Network coverage of Trump's election security address became its own dispute after several major channels skipped live carriage. Reuters, The Guardian, The Washington Post, Politico, and The Hill anchor the record, with the follow-up centered on presidential pressure and broadcaster independence. The White House can criticize coverage, but a license fight would have to move through regulators and legal process. That distinction matters for the public trying to separate a political threat from an enforceable action. Watch for an FCC filing, network statement, White House legal step, or public response from the affected companies. If none appears, the story remains a media pressure fight, not a changed broadcast license status. The Guardian describes a split among networks, while Politico and The Washington Post report the revocation demand. The Hill confirms the carriage decision on the named channels. Future speeches may now draw different newsroom choices. Live feed, delayed excerpts, or fact-checked summaries, and those choices will show whether the dispute changes coverage practice. The regulatory piece is the key safeguard. A license cannot disappear because one official dislikes editorial choices. A real escalation would create docket numbers, deadlines, lawyers, and written orders that broadcasters and the public can inspect. The public record should show whether this becomes a formal legal dispute, a bargaining tactic, or a newsroom policy precedent for later addresses. Trump's primetime election address is now being tested against fact checks, transcripts, and immediate media reaction. NPR News analyzed the speech. AP News says the president again raised doubts about past elections. PBS carried live fact-checking, CBS News previewed allegations about Chinese meddling, and Reuters ties the same address to network carriage decisions. The public record needs exact wording and cited evidence, because election security claims made from the White House can shape party strategy and public trust before any case is filed. Election administrators, courts, Congress, and broadcasters need to know which claims name a specific incident and which remain assertion. Watch for a published transcript, PBS or AP corrections, agency statements, congressional responses, or court filings tied to a discrete claim. Those records will determine whether the address creates a documentable policy dispute or only a campaign-style argument. Until then, the safest reading is limited to the source's descriptions of the speech, the fact-check effort, and the reaction. The next correction or corroboration should name the exact election claim, the evidence offered, and the official body responsible for checking it. Without that chain, the address remains important but administratively unresolved. The next update should separate evidence from rhetoric, identify the responsible agency or court, and state whether any official proceeding follows and identify whether any state election office, court, or federal agency opens a review. Blanche's Attorney General path now runs through a meeting with Epstein survivors and a small group of Republican senators. Reuters, CNBC Top, AP News, Axios, and The Hill all connect the meeting to Senator Tom Tilleys's demand before committing support. The question is not only whether the meeting happens, but whether survivor concerns change confirmation votes or public conditions. Blanche, Tilleys, Cornyn, survivor representatives, Senate leadership, and committee staff all have incentives to frame the session differently. Watch for a statement from Tilleys or Cornyn, a response from survivor representatives, a Blanche comment, or a scheduled committee or floor action. If senators move from hesitation to a public yes or no, the nomination math changes. If they do not, the meeting remains a pressure point. The survivor session also tests whether Epstein-related questions stay private or become part of a public accountability record before the Senate acts. The Senate record should also show whether the meeting changes any nominee questionnaire, hearing topic, or public commitment. Survivors may seek more than a listening session, and senators may ask for a documented response before voting. The next record should reveal whether survivor concerns alter vote commitments. hearing topics, written answers, or the public timetable for confirmation with dates, names, vote commitments, survivor feedback, committee timing, and any revised written pledge. Dallas Federal Reserve President Logan is pushing against easy rate optimism with a call for modestly tighter policy. Reuters, CNBC Top, Bloomberg, and the Economic Times all report the message, with CNBC noting her view that encouraging inflation news was still not enough. A regional Fed president does not set policy alone, but those speeches shape the committee debate and market expectations. Mortgage lenders, banks, businesses, and investors care whether the comment previews broader central bank language. Watch for Logan's full remarks, responses from other Fed officials, the next inflation report, the next jobs report, and the FOMC statement or minutes. If data cools enough, her view may remain a pressure point. If not, it becomes part of the case for higher borrowing costs. Markets will compare the remarks with futures pricing and Treasury yields, because traders need to know whether this is one voice or an emerging bloc. The next policy signal should identify whether Logan is alone, part of a bloc, or previewing language other officials will repeat. That matters because rate expectations change when several officials use the same inflation warning. The next data release should show whether inflation pressure supports Logan's warning, weakens it, or leaves the committee divided before votes before markets decide whether to price tighter credit, longer holds, or another inflation fight. The new Brazil tariff story is about implementation details, not just a headline number. Courthouse News, CNBC, France 24, and other wires report a 25% U.S. levy connected to unfair trade findings, with coverage differing on whether the measure covers most or some imports. That means businesses need product codes, effective dates, collection rules, exemptions, and any appeals process before pricing shipments. Brazilian exporters, U.S. buyers, customs brokers, manufacturers, and consumers will feel different effects depending on the final list. Watch for customs guidance, a Federal Register notice, a Brazilian government response, a WTO step, or revised exclusions. Those documents will show whether the levy becomes a sustained barrier or a negotiating tool. Companies also need landed cost estimates before deciding whether to absorb the charge, raise prices, delay orders, or move sourcing. The next record should identify who pays at the border and when. Companies also need landed cost estimates before deciding whether to absorb the charge, raise prices, delay orders, or move sourcing. Brazilian officials can answer through negotiation, retaliation, or legal challenge, and each route changes costs. The next notice should show covered product categories, start dates, exceptions, customs collection mechanics, and whether Brazil files a response with covered goods, customs forms, importer liabilities, exemption windows, legal venues, and retaliation risks now. Central Texas is again dealing with dangerous floodwater, deaths, and emergency warnings in communities still marked by last year's disaster. AP News reports at least 2 deaths, while the Journal-Gazette, Eagle Tribune, Oskaloosa Herald, and WXXV carry the evolving count and regional context. Local reports also point to the Pedernales River area, Gillespie County, Blanco County, and continuing flash flood alerts. Residents need evacuation routes, shelter information, road closures, rescue updates, and verified casualty numbers from public agencies. Watch National Weather Service warnings, county emergency management briefings, sheriff or fire rescue updates, river gauges, and any state disaster declaration. The next hours are practical: damaged homes, flooded crossings, shelter capacity, and whether rivers crest again. Officials also need to reconcile early 1-death reports with later 2-death accounts in public bulletins. Until then, the AP-led count and local emergency timeline are the safest base. Families and rescue crews also need verified names, road lists, river gauge data, and shelter locations before the danger can be treated as past. The official timeline should separate confirmed deaths from missing person checks. The next update should name affected roads, rescue zones, shelters, river levels, and whether additional rain keeps crews in emergency mode with confirmed shelters, closures, rescue needs, county contacts, rainfall totals, and updated missing person checks today, with public maps online now today. Iran's release of an American detainee is being described as a goodwill gesture, but the diplomatic meaning remains unproven. The Washington Post, NBC News, The Hill, The Guardian, and Reuters supply the record, with NBC saying the citizen had been held since 2024 and Reuters placing the event inside a wider dispute. Prisoner releases can signal a channel, but they do not settle sanctions, regional security, or nuclear questions by themselves. The released person's family, U.S. diplomats, Iranian officials, and other detainees need confirmation of custody transfer, health status, and travel timing. Watch for State Department confirmation, a family statement, Iranian government wording, and any acknowledged follow-up talks. If both governments confirm details, the story becomes clearer for other families. If not, the source-backed point stays narrow. A reported release and Trump's description of goodwill. Any broader conclusion needs names, dates, custody records, and official confirmation from both sides. Any prisoner release diplomacy also needs names, dates, custody records, and official confirmation from both governments before broader conclusions are safe. The next diplomatic signal is whether either side links the release to future talks. The next update should confirm identity, route home, health status, government wording, and whether any other detainee case is moving with consular confirmation, flight timing, medical status, family contact, and any reciprocal diplomatic step. A House vote on Israel aid has become a countable marker of Democratic dissent. The Guardian frames support as buckling. The Hill says 100 Democrats backed cutting aid. Politico says more than 100 voted to end it. CBS News gives a 103-member count, and The Washington Post notes key Democrats behind an amendment. The vote did not rewrite the whole relationship, but it gives activists, lobbyists, Israeli officials, House leaders, and the White House a visible number. Future defense packages will now be judged against that block. Watch the next appropriations bill, roll call vote, caucus statement, White House position, and Senate response. If similar numbers recur, the split becomes a governing constraint rather than a one-time protest. Leadership will have to decide whether to absorb the dissent, negotiate language, or whip harder. The next whip count will show whether the bloc grows, shrinks, or turns into bargaining power. The vote count also gives outside groups a target list inside the Democratic caucus. The next whip count will show whether the 100-plus bloc grows, shrinks, or turns into a negotiating force on future bills. The next roll call should show whether leadership faces a durable caucus revolt, a negotiable amendment fight, or a temporary protest with member names, leadership instructions, amendment text, Senate reaction, and White House positioning. The Black Sea shipping fight is spilling into grain markets and maritime risk. Reuters, the Financial Times, Al Jazeera, and CNN describe a maritime security escalation, port danger, export uncertainty, insurance pressure, and market reaction around the same waterway. Al Jazeera reports a deadly Odessa attack as Ukraine targets vessels, and CNN describes wider pressure on a key waterway. The Black Sea matters for export routes, insurance costs, naval pressure, and food prices far beyond the battlefield. Ukrainian ports, Russian shipping, grain buyers, insurers, traders, and import-dependent countries all need port-level facts. Watch port closure notices, casualty updates from Odessa, shipping advisories, insurance rate changes, wheat market closes, and military statements from Kyiv and Moscow. Those records will show whether the strikes are episodic or begin disrupting exports for longer. Futures prices and port bulletins will tell whether food market pressure is temporary, regional, or spreading through contracts. Traders will also watch whether shipping companies reroute vessels, raise risk premiums, or slow loading at Ukrainian ports. Humanitarian agencies and grain buyers need port-level facts, not just battlefield claims, before judging supply pressure. The next maritime record should show whether insurers, shippers, ports, and grain traders treat the danger as temporary or persistent with named ports. Ship movements, insurance notices, wheat contracts, casualty updates, and export delays through July records now.